So for today's deep dive, we are drawing on a massive stack of sources, primarily a really comprehensive encyclopedia article, to untangle this incredibly complex web of legends surrounding a figure named Chanakya.
Right.
He is traditionally known as the kingmaker who helped found the mighty Maurya Empire. But our mission today is to discover how a man with absolutely zero documented historical records, I mean, no contemporary inscriptions, no coins with his face on them, how he became the ultimate symbol of statecraft in South Asia.
We really need to separate the semi-legendary mastermind from the actual tangible political text that ended up being attributed to him later on.
Exactly.
So let's start with the geopolitical landscape, just to understand why a kingmaker was even necessary for you, the listener, to kind of picture this. We are talking about the late 4th century BCE.
Yeah, that's the era.
The Nanda Empire is ruling over the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. They are sitting on immense wealth, they have a massive army, but things are destabilizing.
Very much so. You have Alexander the Great, who is recently pushed into the northwestern borders, which fractures the local powers before he turns back.
Right, so the region is just ripe for a new, unified empire.
Mm.
And according to the texts, the man who orchestrates this transition is a Brahmin named Chanakya. He supposedly serves as the chief advisor to Chandragupta Maurya, helping him overthrow the Nandas, and later even serves his son, Bindusara.
But as we just established, we have no physical proof he existed. We just have these legendary accounts categorized into 4 distinct traditions.
4 of them, yeah.
Right, so there's a Buddhist tradition, a Jain tradition, a Kashmiri tradition, and a secular Sanskrit play.
Which brings us to this concept of a semi-legendary figure. Like, how does a culture remember a person who undeniably had a massive impact because the establishment of the unified Maurya Empire under Chandragupta is a hardened historical fact, but who left no physical footprint?
It's a great question, and the historian Thomas Troutman points out something really crucial here in our sources. He notes that while the historicity of Chanakya's specific magical exploits is, wildly exaggerated, his actual existence is highly probable.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because to doubt he existed at all places a greater strain on the imagination. You'd have to invent some other origin point for all these incredibly persistent, divergent stories across entirely different religious and secular divides.
So he's essentially the dark matter of ancient Indian history.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
Like, you can't observe him directly, but you can calculate his exact position by observing the massive gravitational pull he exerted on everything around him.
Exactly. Because while the 4 traditions we are going to examine were separated by centuries, geography, and entirely different theological worldviews, the inciting incident of Chanakya's story is the exact same across all of them.
Okay, let's unpack this core seed.
The core seed is this. Chanakya is deeply personally insulted by the Nanda king. He flies into an absolute rage, vows to utterly destroy the Nanda dynasty, and then systematically finds, trains, and installs Chandragupta to replace the king.
So it's almost like comparing him to a King Arthur or Robin Hood, where the core of the cultural myth stays the same, even as the details shift around.
Right, but instead of a noble knight pulling a sword from a stone, the cultural hero here is a ruthless, unapologetically Machiavellian political strategist.
If all 4 of these diverse traditions agree on the insult and the vow of revenge, it strongly suggests that the grudge is the one true historical fact we have. But the Buddhist texts turn him into a physical monster to prove a point, while the Jain texts spin his ruthlessness in a completely different direction.
Exactly.
So how did these different cultures use his story to fit their own worldviews? Let's start with the oldest of these narratives, the Buddhist tradition.
Well, the Buddhist version draws from a text called the Mahavamsa, which is a Pali language chronicle from Sri Lanka, generally dated between the 5th and 6th centuries CE.
So that's roughly 800 or 900 years after Chanakya supposedly lived.
Yes, quite a gap. In this text, Chanakya is a Brahmin from Takshashila, which was a major center of learning in ancient India, and he is born with a full set of canine teeth.
Wait, a full set of canine teeth? Like, prominently?
Yeah, very prominent. And in the ancient science of physiognomy, being born with prominent canine teeth was a physical mark of royalty.
Oh, wow.
It was essentially a prophecy etched into his bones that he was destined to rule.
Okay, but his mother is terrified by this one.
She is. She fears that if he fulfills this prophecy and becomes a king, he will become arrogant and neglect her. So, to pacify his mother's anxiety, Chanakya actually takes a stone and shatters his own teeth.
Which is such a visceral introduction to a character.
Wow.
I mean, you immediately establish that he possesses the raw destiny for ultimate power. but he willingly mutilates his own body out of filial piety.
Right, it sets him up as someone who dictates his own fate. But this mutilation just adds to his overall appearance, which the text describes as incredibly jarringly ugly.
Right, he has broken teeth, crooked feet, a harsh demeanor. And this physical ugliness is the crux of the inciting incident in the Buddhist text, isn't it?
Exactly. So the Nanda emperor, Dhanananda, hosts this massive almsgiving ceremony for Brahmins in the capital city. Chanakya arrives and takes a seat. But when the emperor walks in, he is so physically repulsed by Chanakya's appearance that he orders the guards to just throw him out of the assembly.
Which is deeply humiliating.
Chanakya is furious. He rips off his sacred Brahmin thread, curses the emperor right to his face, and has to flee the palace.
And the outline mentioned he escapes in the disguise of an Ajivika ascetic. We really need to unpack that because it's not just a random disguise he threw together.
No, it's a highly calculated choice. The Ajivikas were a major ascetic movement in ancient India, contemporary with early Buddhism and Jainism.
And they had a very specific philosophy, right?
Yeah, they were strict determinists. They believed everything was predestined by a cosmic principle called niyati, and human free will was essentially an illusion. Because of this, they practiced extreme asceticism, often wandering completely naked, covered in dust, living entirely outside the bounds of conventional society.
So if you are the most wanted man in the Nanda Empire, disguising yourself as a naked, dust-covered determinist who explicitly rejects societal norms is like the perfect way to become completely invisible to the state apparatus.
Yeah.
You just vanish into the landscape.
Exactly. It highlights his pragmatic brilliance even in a moment of sheer desperation. Now let's look at the heavy symbolism of the emperor's insult for a second.
Yeah, why make the hero of the Buddhist story so physically deformed?
The text is making a very deliberate argument. It is emphasizing intellectual dominance over superficial perfection. The Nanda emperor judges a genius by his physical form and discards him.
And for the Buddhist writers, this superficiality is a fatal flaw that dooms the entire empire. So Chanakya is hiding out in the Vindhya forest, burning with his vow of revenge. But, you can't overthrow an empire with just a grudge. You need capital.
You need a lot of it.
Right. And here, the text says he uses a secret technique to turn 1 gold coin into 8 coins. He repeats this until he has hoarded 800 million gold coins. This really feels like a mythology trying to explain the massive economic reality of raising a mercenary army.
It is precisely that. Raising an army requires unimaginable wealth. So a man in the forest suddenly possessing that kind of capital requires a miraculous explanation in the folklore.
Makes sense.
But capital is only half the equation. He needs a figurehead. He needs a king.
And he finds one while watching a group of kids playing.
Yes.
Yes.
One boy is playing the role of the king, and he's ordering the robbers in the game to have their limbs cut off. But then he miraculously reattaches those limbs.
And this boy is Chandragupta.
Exactly. Chanakya is awestruck by this display of power, buys the boy from his foster father for 1,000 gold coins, and takes him away to mold him into an emperor.
But Chanakya is cautious. He actually has 2 potential successors in mind at this point, according to the text. There's Chandragupta, and there's a son of the Nanda emperor named Pabata, whom Chanakya had befriended earlier.
Right, and Chanakya gives both boys a woolen thread amulet to wear around their necks. And to decide who is truly worthy of the throne, he devises a psychological test.
And it is a chilling test. While Chandragupta is sleeping, Chanakya tells Pabata to take the woolen thread off Chandragupta's neck without waking him up and without breaking the thread.
And what happens?
Pabata tries, gets nervous, and fails. He backs down. But later, the roles are reversed. Pabata is sleeping, and Chanakya gives Chandragupta the exact same instructions. Get the thread, don't wake him, don't break it.
And Chandragupta's solution is very different.
Yet Chandragupta doesn't try to carefully untie it. He just draws his sword, cuts off Pabata's head, and takes the thread.
Think about what the text is valuing here. It's a test of absolute ruthless pragmatism. Pabata treats it like a puzzle with rules.
Right. He tries to solve it within the constraints.
But Chandragupta recognizes that the only rule is achieving the objective, so he eliminates the obstacle entirely. For the Buddhist commentators, this establishes Chandragupta as a definitive man of action. He is unburdened by conventional morality when a strategic goal is set.
Which is terrifying, but, effective. So Chanakya trains this kid for 7 years, digs up his 800 million gold coins, raises an army, and they invade the Nanda Empire. And they fail.
Completely. Their army is crushed.
Right. They're wandering around in disguise, defeated, when they happen to overhear a conversation in a village between a woman and her child.
This is one of the most famous strategic anecdotes in the entire Chanakya mythology.
So the kid is eating a cake, but he eats the middle of the cake first and throws away the crusts. The mother scolds him, saying, you are eating food just like Chandragupta attacks an empire. You attack the center without securing the borders first.
Right, and Chanakya and Chandragupta hear this, realize their massive military blunder, raise a new army, and start conquering the border villages first.
Slowly squeezing inward until they finally take the capital and kill the emperor.
This is a masterclass in ancient military strategy encoded into a folktale. It represents the transition from a disorganized, ambitious raid into a systematic, calculated siege.
But what is critical to note is how the violence and paranoia escalate once they actually take power. Taking the throne is one thing, but keeping it requires a different kind of darkness.
Oh, it gets incredibly dark. Chanakya needs to find the dead Nanda emperor's hidden treasury. He asks a fisherman where it is.
And what happens to the fisherman?
The second the fisherman reveals the location, Chanakya executes him just to keep the secret safe.
Wow. And that paranoia extends to the new emperor himself, doesn't it?
It does. Chanakya knows Chandragupta is a prime target for assassination. So, without telling him, Chanakya begins secretly slipping tiny, incrementally increasing doses of poison into Chandragupta's daily meals.
Mithridatism, the practice of building immunity through microdosing.
Exactly. But the emperor has no idea. One day, the emperor is eating, and he affectionately shares his food with his wife, Empress Drudara.
And she is not immune?
No, she isn't. And she is 7 days away from giving birth.
This is the part that is just wild. Chanakya walks into the room just as the empress swallows the poisoned food. He knows instantly she's going to die. The dose is lethal to an unconditioned body.
Yes.
But he needs the royal heir to survive, to ensure the dynasty. So without a second of hesitation, he cuts off the empress's head to stop the poison from circulating through her bloodstream.
And then he slices her belly open with a sword to extract the fetus.
I mean, it's horrific. And because the baby is premature, the text says Chanakya takes the fetus and places it inside the belly of a freshly killed goat.
Right. And he does this every single day for 7 days, transferring the fetus to a new dead goat, treating the animal carcasses as a makeshift incubator until the baby is fully born.
And they named the baby Bindusara because his body had spots, or Bindu, from the goat's blood. If you're listening to this and wondering how we are supposed to process this level of violence, from the supposed hero of the story, he murders an innocent fisherman, he decapitates the empress, he performs horrifying ancient medical procedures, it really begs the question, is the Buddhist text presenting him as a hero or a villain?
It's a fundamental misunderstanding to view him through a binary lens of hero or villain here. The Buddhist texts are presenting him as a functional necessity.
A necessity.
Yeah, in this worldview, the mechanism of statecraft is inherently violent and morally compromising. It generates massive amounts of negative karma. Chanakya is the ultimate instrument of that political order.
Or he takes the hit.
Exactly. He absorbs the karmic debt. He does the terrifying, dirty work required to establish the empire so that the empire can eventually bring peace and stability.
So he is the necessary evil. But surely other religious traditions didn't want to cede the narrative of the great empire builder entirely to the Buddhists. How did a rival group like the Jains spin his ruthlessness to fit their theology?
Let's move to the Jain tradition. The Jain tradition comes primarily from a 12th century CE text called the Parashishtaparvan, written by a scholar named Hemachandra, though it draws on sources dating back to the 1st century.
And Thomas Trautmann actually argues that this Jain version might be older and more internally consistent than the Buddhist one, right?
He does, and immediately we see a shift in origin. In the Buddhist text, he's from the north. In the Jain text, he's born in a village in South India, specifically to lay Jain parents.
And we get a fascinating parallel to the teeth story. He is born with a full set of teeth. Jain monks prophesy this means he will become a king.
But his father, wanting to protect him from the arrogance of power, breaks the baby's teeth.
Right. And then the monks amend their prophecy. They say, okay, he won't be a king, but he will be the power behind the throne.
It's the same motif, but tailored to emphasize his role not as a thwarted ruler, but as the ultimate gray eminence. He is designed to be the advisor.
So he grows up, marries, gets mocked for being poor, and decides to go to the capital, Pataliputra, to get donations from the Nanda emperor. He walks into the imperial court, bypasses everyone, and just sits down on the emperor's throne.
Which is incredibly bold.
A servant girl politely asks him to move to the next seat. Chanakya doesn't say a word. He just places his water pot, his commandal, on that next seat and stays on the throne.
She offers him 4 different seats, and he just keeps putting his personal items on them, refusing to move his body from the throne.
Finally, the servant physically kicks him off. Enraged, Chanakya makes his vow to uproot the Nanda dynasty.
Notice the shift in the mechanism of the conflict here. In the Buddhist version, he's thrown out because his physical ugliness offends the emperor's superficial aesthetics. In the Jain version, it's a battle of status and sheer psychological stubbornness. He claims the highest seat of power, the throne itself, and dares the state to move him. It's a much more calculated provocation.
He needs a king, so he finds Chandragupta. But their army-building process is different here. To fund their rebellion, the Jain text doesn't have him miraculously multiplying coins.
No, instead it explicitly says he acquired wealth through alchemy, turning base metals into gold.
Which is still mystical, but it's grounded in a sort of ancient proto-science rather than pure magic. They build their army, they attack the capital, and just like in the Buddhist version, they fail initially. They are fleeing the battlefield, being chased by an enemy officer. They reach a lake.
And this is where we see a very different kind of test.
Yeah, Chanakya tells Chandragupta to jump into the water and hide. Chanakya then sits down on the shore and pretends to be a meditating ascetic. The enemy soldier runs up, sees the ascetic, and asks if he's seen Chandragupta.
And Chanakya calmly points his finger right at the lake.
He sells him out instantly.
Instantly.
The soldier starts taking off his armor to jump in and make the arrest. But the second the soldier is distracted by his armor, Chanakya grabs the soldier's own sword and kills him.
Now think about the psychological weight of this mechanism. When Chandragupta comes out of the water, Chanakya asks him, what went through your mind when I pointed at the lake and told the enemy exactly where you were?
And Chandragupta replies that he trusted his master to make the best decision.
Exactly. This isn't just a clever escape story. It's a mechanism to test absolute loyalty. Chanakya needed to know that Chandragupta's obedience was so total that it overrode his own biological survival instinct.
They also have the exact same center realization in this version, except here it's a boy burning his finger by sticking it into the middle of a bowl of hot gruel instead of a cake.
Right, but the lesson is the same.
So they ally with a mountain king named Parvataka and start taking border cities. And the way they take these cities really highlights Chanakya's mastery of psychological warfare and the weaponization of superstition.
This is a vital point. The Jain Chanakya is a master manipulator of belief systems.
So there is a city holding out against their siege. Chanakya disguises himself as a Shaivite mendicant, a wandering Hindu holy man, and walks straight into the besieged city.
And what does he tell them?
He tells the defenders, your siege will only end if you remove the idols of the 7 mothers from your temple.
And the defenders, being deeply superstitious, immediately remove the idols to appease the gods.
The second they do, Chanakya signals his army to pull back and end the siege. The townspeople think the holy man's prophecy worked. They start celebrating, they drop their guard, and Chanakya's army launches a surprise attack and slaughters them.
It is brilliant, cynical manipulation. He fabricates a divine intervention to create a false sense of security. He understands that people are more vulnerable to their own beliefs than they are to an invading army.
They eventually capture the capital. Chandragupta becomes emperor. But we can't gloss over what happens to their ally, King Parvataka.
No, we definitely can't.
Parvataka falls in love with one of the Nanda emperor's former Vishakanyas, a poison girl. The outline mentioned this, but we need to explain how this works, because the Vishakanya isn't just someone carrying poison in a vial.
Right. In ancient Indian lore, a Vishakanya is a young woman who has been systematically microdosed with venom from childhood, similar to the Mithridatism we discussed with Chandragupta, but taken to a biological extreme.
Okay.
The mythology states that her bodily fluids, her sweat, her kiss, or even her touch become lethal to an unconditioned person. She is essentially a biological weapon.
And Chanakya knows exactly what she is. But he approves the marriage anyway. On the wedding night, Parvataka touches her, absorbs the venom, and collapses.
And Chandragupta panics and wants to call a physician, but Chanakya stops him. He just watches Parvataka die.
By doing absolutely nothing, he neatly eliminates their ally, so Chandragupta gets the whole empire to himself.
It's the exact same ruthlessness we saw in the Buddhist text, but executed with cleaner hands. He didn't cut off a head, he just allowed the mechanics of an accident to play out to his ultimate advantage.
But his methods of consolidating power are still insane. He finds a weaver who burns down any part of his house that has cockroaches in it. Chanakya thinks, I like this guy's style, and puts him in charge of crushing political rebels.
And the weaver literally burns down an entire village just because they refused to give him food in the past.
And then there's the state treasury. The empire needs money. So Chanakya invites all the rich merchants over to his house, gets them incredibly drunk, and gambles with them using loaded dice to drain their personal wealth directly into the state coffers. I mean, it's like a mafia don running a rigged casino to extort the neighborhood.
Well, I have to push back on the mafia don analogy there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because a mafia don hoards wealth for his own personal enrichment and ego. What Chanakya is doing here aligns perfectly with the philosophy found in the Arthashastra, which argues that the king is essentially a slave to the state.
Okay, explain that.
An empire cannot function, armies cannot be paid, and infrastructure cannot be built without a full treasury. If the state collapses, anarchy ensues. Therefore, tricking merchants with loaded dice isn't personal extortion. It is the brutal, necessary extraction of resources to keep the geopolitical organism alive. The state's survival supersedes individual morality.
That actually makes sense. It's institutional survival, not personal greed.
Hmm.
But the Jain text also has a very specific religious agenda it needs to push, right?
Yes, the Jain authors used Chanakya's undisputed genius to validate their own religious superiority over Buddhism and Hinduism.
There's a story where, during a famine, 2 young Jain monks use a magic ointment to turn into journals so they can eat from the emperor's plate. Chanakya notices the food disappearing.
So he figures it out by spreading powder on the floor to track their invisible footprints, and then fills the room with thick smoke to make their eyes water, which washes the magic ointment off their eyes.
But instead of punishing them for stealing from the emperor, he starts giving them generous alms. Meanwhile, Chandragupta is giving money to non-Jain monks.
And Chanakya wants to prove his guys are morally superior.
So he spreads that same tracking powder near the windows of the women's quarters in the palace. He proves to Chandragupta that the non-Jain monks are sneaking over at night to peep through the windows at the women, while the Jain monks' footprints stay far away.
Right, and Chandragupta is convinced by this forensic evidence and makes the Jain monks his spiritual counselors.
It's a classic religious polemic woven into an espionage thriller. The political genius of the state mathematically proves the moral superiority of the Jains.
Exactly.
And this Jain text also includes the birth of Bindusara, with Chanakya cutting open the poisoned empress's belly to save the baby. But the Jain text goes much further into Chanakya's old age and eventual death, and the mechanism of it is fascinating.
The end of Chanakya's life is a masterpiece of narrative closure.
So Chandragupta eventually abdicates the throne to become a Jain monk, and Bindusara takes over. Bindusara has a minister named Subandhu, who is incredibly jealous of Chanakya's enduring influence.
Right. And Subandhu whispers in the new emperor's ear, revealing the gruesome historical truth. Chanakya, cut open your mother's belly.
Bindusara confronts the nurses, they confirm it, and he is furious. He hates Chanakya. Chanakya, who's very old now, decides he's done with politics. He retires and decides to practice salakana, the traditional Jain practice of facing death, by voluntarily fasting.
But Bindusara eventually finds out the full context that Chanakya did it to save his life from the poison and begs for forgiveness.
But Chanakya refuses to return. So Bindusara orders Subandhu to go apologize and stop Chanakya from starving himself.
But Subandhu is treacherous. He pretends to appease Chanakya, but actually arranges to burn him to death in his retirement pavilion.
But Chanakya is always 10 steps ahead. Before he retired, he knew Subandhu would come for him. He left behind a booby trap in his house, a chest secured with 100 locks.
And Subandhu, being greedy, thinks it's full of unimaginable jewels. He spends forever breaking all the locks.
He opens it, and inside is just a sweet-smelling perfume. He inhales it. And then he sees a note written on birch bark. The note is a curse. Anyone who smells this perfume must either immediately become an ascetic monk or they will die.
And Subandhu tests the mechanism. He exposes another man to the perfume, feeds him rich food that ascetic monks aren't allowed to eat, and the man drops dead.
Wow.
So Subandhu, the jealous, ambitious politician who coveted ultimate power, is forced to give up all his wealth, his status, and his political ambition, and become a wandering, starving monk just to stay alive.
That is the ultimate revenge trap in literature.
And look at how perfectly it aligns a revenge plot with Jain ascetic values. Chanakya defeats his enemy not by killing him, but by forcing him into a life of absolute religious renunciation and nonviolence. It's the ultimate Jain victory.
So in both the Buddhist and the Jain versions, despite their theological differences, Chanakya is the undeniable mastermind from day one. He's the active agent of change driving the history. But as we look at our third source, the Kashmiri tradition, the narrative structure completely flips.
It does. In the Kashmiri tradition, Chanakya is not the mastermind who shapes the world. He is a weapon wielded by someone else entirely.
This tradition comes from 11th century Kashmiri Sanskrit texts, primarily the Brihatkatha Manjari by Shimendra. And this version starts with something completely out of left field, magical body snatching.
Yes.
If you're listening to this and thinking, wait, how does an entire empire not notice their king has been replaced by a body snatcher? You have to understand the isolation of ancient royalty. Kings were sequestered. Only a few close advisors truly interacted with them daily.
Exactly. The premise is deeply rooted in yogic folklore. We have 3 disciples of a sage. One of them is named Indradatta. They go to the capital to ask Emperor Nanda for a massive fee for their guru, 10 million gold coins.
But literally as they arrive, the emperor drops dead of natural causes.
So Indradatta uses advanced yogic magic to project his soul into the dead emperor's body. He stands up as the emperor and immediately grants his friend's request for the gold.
The narrative shift here is crucial. The protagonist of this story is not Chanakya. It's the Nanda emperor's actual prime minister, a man named Shakatala. Shakatala is highly observant. He interacts with the emperor daily and immediately realizes that the man in the emperor's body is an imposter, a fake emperor, often called Yogananda.
Right, and Shakatala quickly has Indradatta's original empty body burned so the soul can never return to it.
But before Shakatala can expose the fake emperor to the public, the fake emperor realizes Shakatala is onto him and has him arrested. Shakatala and his 100 sons are thrown into a subterranean dungeon.
And the guards only give them enough food for one single person to survive.
In a horrifying display of grim resolve, the 100 sons voluntarily starve themselves to death so that Shakatala can eat all the rations, survive the imprisonment, and eventually exact revenge.
It establishes Shakatala as a man of bottomless trauma and unyielding patience. The fake emperor's character eventually deteriorates so badly that he is forced to release Shakatala and restore him as minister just to keep the state functioning.
But Shakatala is just biding his time, looking for a mechanism to destroy the imposter.
And this is when he finds Chanakya.
Right. Shakatala is walking along and sees this Brahmin methodically, furiously uprooting an entire patch of grass. Shakatala asks him what he's doing. Chanakya says, "One blade of this grass pricked my foot, so I'm destroying every single root to wipe it out of existence."
It's like salting the earth after a battle. He isn't just killing the weed that hurt him, he's punishing the soil itself so nothing can ever survive there again.
It's a terrifying display of systematic vengeance.
And Shakatala looks at this man, a man so petty and relentless that he will declare total war on a patch of grass over a minor scrape, and realizes, this is it. This is the weapon I need to destroy the emperor.
Shakatala intentionally sets a trap. He invites Chanakya to the imperial court to preside over a highly paid ritual ceremony. Shakatala treats Chanakya like absolute royalty. But when they get to the court, Shakatala deliberately arranges for a different Brahmin to take the seat of honor.
He manufactures the insult to trigger the weapon.
Chanakya is furious at being slighted. Shakatala plays innocent and blames the fake emperor. Chanakya goes ballistic. He unties his top knot, his Sika. The Sika is a very important symbol of a Brahmin's purity, religious dedication, and status.
Untying it is a profound act of defiance.
He vows never to tie back up until the emperor is destroyed.
And then, the Kashmiri text leans entirely into magic. There are no mercenary armies, no loaded dice, no center-of-the-cake military strategies.
It's just pure magic.
Yeah, Chanakya goes back to Shakatala's house. Shakatala gives him all the magical materials he needs, and Chanakya performs a 7-day magic ritual. This ritual summons a magical fever that strikes the fake emperor, killing him in exactly 7 days.
Shakatala then executes the fake emperor's son, installs the real Nanda's son Chandragupta on the throne, appoints Chanakya as the royal priest, and then retires to the forest, having finally avenged his 100 dead sons.
Notice how the legend is evolving here. In the Buddhist and Jain text, Chanakya is a self-made rebel, a strategic genius who builds an empire from scratch.
But in the Kashmiri text, the history is completely swallowed by the mythology. He is an elemental force of vengeance that a seasoned politician manipulates for his own ends. I mean, it's like burning down your entire house just to kill a single spider.
Which makes our next source so jarring because it strips away all the magic, all the miracles, and leaves us with pure, unadulterated, cold-blooded espionage.
We are talking about the Arthashastra, a famous Sanskrit play written by Vishakhadatta. The dating is a bit murky, sometime between the 4th and 8th centuries CE, likely during the Gupta period because it references the Huna invasions happening at that time.
The title translates to the signet ring of Rakshasa.
And in this version, it is a high-stakes chess match of intelligence and counterintelligence between Chanakya and the former prime minister of the Nanda Empire, a man named Rakshasa.
Chanakya has already helped Chandragupta defeat the Nandas using an allied army of foreign mercenaries. The texts mention Balikas, Kiratas, Parasikas, Hunas. But the war isn't over. Rakshasa is still out there, deeply loyal to the fallen Nanda dynasty, and he is actively trying to assassinate Chandragupta.
And the spycraft is just incredible. Rakshasa sends a poison girl to assassinate Chandragupta. But Chanakya's spies figure out the plot. Instead of just killing the assassin, Chanakya runs a double-blind operation. He redirects the poison girl to assassinate King Parvata, who is their own ally.
He eliminates an ally they no longer want to share power with, and he publicly frames Rakshasa for the murder.
It's ruthless efficiency. But Rakshasa tries again. He smuggles assassins into Chandragupta's bedroom through a secret underground tunnel.
But Chanakya is observant. He's inspecting the royal bedroom and notices a trail of ants coming out of a crack in the floor, and the ants are carrying crumbs of human food.
He realizes there are men living under the floorboards waiting for nightfall. So what does he do? He just quietly seals the exits and burns the assassins alive inside the tunnel. Comparing him to a modern forensic detective isn't a stretch. He's reading the physical evidence of the environment to uncover the plot.
And he doesn't just defend, he goes on the offensive with psychological warfare. The son of the murdered King Parvata, a man named Malayakatu, believes Rakshasa killed his father, but eventually defects to Rakshasa's side anyway to fight Chandragupta.
And Chanakya's primary goal is to break that fragile alliance.
Right. To do this, Chanakya utilizes a network of spies that don't even know about each other. He has a spy posing as a Jain monk named Jivasiti. He manages to get his hands on Rakshasa's personal signet ring, his mudra, hence the title of the play.
He uses the ring to forge a letter to Malayakatu, making it look like Rakshasa is plotting to betray him. He has spies sell jewelry that belonged to the dead King Parvata to Rakshasa, so Rakshasa is unknowingly wearing stolen loot.
And then in a masterstroke of theatrical manipulation, Chanakya and Chandragupta stage a massive fake argument in the royal court, completely for the benefit of Rakshasa's spies who are watching.
Right. Chandragupta pretends to fire Chanakya, shouting that Rakshasa would make a much better prime minister.
So when word of this fake fight reaches Malayakatu, he thinks, wait, is Rakshasa secretly cutting a deal with Chandragupta to be his minister?
Malayakatu summons Rakshasa. Rakshasa shows up wearing the dead king's jewelry. Malayakatu confronts him with the forged letter sealed with his own signet ring.
Rakshasa realizes he's been completely outplayed by invisible forces.
Malayakatu brutally executes his own allies in a paranoid frenzy, which causes the rest of his army to desert him.
The brilliance of the Mudra Rakshasa is that Chanakya doesn't win by killing Rakshasa. He wins by cornering him emotionally and institutionally.
Chanakya discovers that a loyal friend of Rakshasa, a jeweler named Chandanadasa, is sheltering Rakshasa's family. Chanakya sentences the jeweler to death. When Rakshasa hears this, he is so honorable that he rushes back to the capital and surrenders to save his friend's life.
And Chanakya, having utterly defeated him, offers him clemency. He makes Rakshasa the prime minister to Chandragupta.
He realizes that a new empire needs the institutional knowledge and loyalty of the old guard to survive. Finally, having achieved his goal, Chanakya reties his topknot and retires. This play doesn't use magic. It uses intelligence, forgery, and psychological manipulation.
This image of Chanakya as the ultimate pragmatic genius, the master of realpolitik who manipulates human nature without needing miracles, is exactly why, centuries later, people desperately wanted him to be the author of India's greatest political manual.
Which brings us to the final, most debated section of our deep dive, the Arthashastra.
For a long time, the Arthashastra was considered a lost text. Conventionally, Chanakya is identified by two other names, Kautilya, which is likely his clan or Gotra name, and Vishnugupta.
Tradition holds that Kautilya wrote this massive, serious, incredibly detailed manual on statecraft, monetary policy, welfare, and war, specifically Nutta Yuddha. The outline mentions Kuta, and we need to clarify what that means in ancient Indian warfare.
Ancient Indian texts often outline the rules of Dharma Yuddha, or just war. This involved strict codes of conduct, fighting only during the day, not attacking non-combatants, not using poisoned weapons, and formal declarations of battle.
Right, like an honorable war.
But Kuta Yuddha is the exact opposite. It is unjust, concealed, or deceitful war. It is the use of assassinations, spies, sowing discord among enemy ranks, night attacks, and psychological terror. The Arthashastra explicitly details how and when a king must abandon Dharmayuddha and utilize Kutayuddha to ensure the survival of the state.
It is often compared to Machiavelli's The Prince, but it's vastly more comprehensive. It covers everything from how to set up spy networks to how to manage agriculture and taxation. For centuries, it was only known through references in other texts.
Until 1905.
Right. A librarian named Arthashastra was looking through a pile of uncatalogued ancient palm leaf manuscripts donated to the Oriental Research Institute in Mysore, and he found it, the complete Arthashastra.
It was a monumental discovery, and for a long time everyone just assumed, well, the text says it's by Kautilya, and Kautilya is Chanakya, so the guy who overthrew the Nanda Empire wrote this book in the 4th century BCE.
But modern critical scholarship has dropped a bombshell on that assumption. Scholars like Thomas Troutman and Patrick Olivelle have conducted rigorous statistical and linguistic analyses of the text.
And they overwhelmingly reject the idea that the historical Chanakya wrote the Arthashastra.
If you're listening and wondering how linguistic analysis can disprove authorship, it's about tracking the mechanism of language evolution, isn't it?
Precisely. Troutman used statistical analysis to study the frequency of specific function words like and, but, or, which authors use unconsciously. He found clear statistical variations indicating the text had multiple authors.
And Olivelle looked at the evolution of specific political vocabulary. The language used to describe state administration in the Arthashastra aligns with terminology from centuries after the Mauryan period.
The linguistic evidence suggests the text was compiled by multiple authors over a period of centuries, roughly between 150 BCE and 300 CE.
That is long after the Mauryan Empire fell. The oldest layers of the text date to around 150 BCE. A middle redaction happened around 50 to 125 CE, and the final version we have today was probably locked in between 175 and 300 CE. Furthermore, the name Chanakya doesn't even appear in the main body of the text.
The identification happens right at the very end in the penultimate paragraph, which states that the treatise was authored by the person who rescued the country from the Nanda kings.
But scholars believe this was a later interpolation, added centuries after the core text was written.
Exactly.
But why? Why backdate a textbook?
The leading theory is that this was done during the Gupta Empire. The Guptas ruled several centuries after the Mauryas, and they desperately wanted to present themselves as the legitimate historical successors to the Mauryan legacy. They even reused names like Chandragupta.
So by tying this brilliant, comprehensive manual of statecraft to the legendary founder of the Mauryan Empire, the Guptas gave the text, and by extension, their own political practices, an aura of ancient, unassailable authority.
It's similar to how the Romans commissioned Virgil's Aeneid to trace their lineage back to the heroes of Troy. It is legitimacy through antiquity.
It was ancient political propaganda.
Yeah.
But if scholars have known since the 1960s that he likely didn't write it, why is he still universally credited for it today? If you go to a bookstore right now, the spine says Chanakya's Arthashastra.
To understand that, we have to look at the 20th century. When Arthashastra translated and published the text in the early 1900s, India was in the grip of British colonization.
Right.
The British often justified their rule by claiming that ancient India lacked a pragmatic, native tradition of strong, centralized political administration. They argued Indians were too focused on mysticism and religion to understand real politics.
And then boom, a librarian finds a 2,000-year-old manual that is more sophisticated than anything Europe had at the time.
For the Indian nationalist movement, the Arthashastra was a revelation. It proved definitively that India had a rich indigenous school of political theory and economics.
Believing that Chanakya, the legendary defiant kingmaker who expelled foreign invaders, wrote it, provided a direct romantic link to South Asia's most powerful antiquity. It was a source of immense national pride.
To detach his name from the book felt to some like stripping the text of his historical power.
It's fascinating. We have a historical figure who vanishes into legend, only to be resurrected 2,000 years later as the symbol of a modern nation's political heritage. Which brings us back to you, listening to this deep dive. Whether you're prepping for a boardroom negotiation, studying international relations, or just trying to understand how history is written, Chanakya's story teaches us something profound.
And what's that?
The idea of a mastermind is sometimes vastly more powerful than the historical facts. Today, his name is everywhere in India. The diplomatic enclave in New Delhi is called Chanakyapuri. There are training ships, law universities, and endless television dramas bearing his name, Walk into any airport bookstore and you'll find management books titled Corporate Chanakya. His legacy as the ruthless, brilliant founder of Indian political science is completely unshakable, regardless of what the linguistic data says about the Arthashastra.
We started by talking about looking for a historical monument, like a pyramid, and finding a phantom instead. We've seen how 4 different traditions, Buddhist, Jain, Kashmiri, and secular drama, along with the modern nationalist movement, all molded Chanakya to fit their specific agendas.
Whether that was promoting the superiority of Jain monks, the inevitability of Buddhist karma, the drama of Kashmiri revenge, or the pride of a modern nation.
He became whatever they needed him to be. And that leaves us with a final thought to mull over. When we read the biographies of the legendary founders or geniuses of our own modern institutions, the tech visionaries, the nation builders, the corporate titans, how much of their story is actual objective history?
That's a great point.
And how much is just the story we need them to have lived in order to justify our own beliefs about power, success, and the mechanisms of statecraft?
It really makes you wonder if our modern framework for historical truth is just as subjective as the ancient one.